welcome Maria Nedeva, who is from the business school and has been associated dean for graduate education. And she's on the University Ethics Committee, and she's going to talk about what the overall thinking is behind it, how it works, and answer your questions. So I'll hand over to her. Thank you, Maria.
Thanks, Angela. Okay. So first of all, I would like to begin by kind of with my credentials, so to speak, for this job. I suspect actually that the one reason I'm on this committee, the University Committee Ethics Committee, is that when I stopped being Associate Dean, my colleagues in the business school were very worried that I will get withdrawal symptoms from committees. So they had to find me a committee where I would enjoy being, and which will save me this peril of not going to any meetings any longer. So they asked me whether I would like to be on this committee, and the reason I said yes is a bit more serious than that probably, although this is serious. They were really worried. I actually, in the early 2000s, 2001, 2 and 3, I think, other 2 papers, published papers on something that used to be called the ethical review process. And probably some of the people who come from medicine, shall I come closer to this? So people who come from medicine probably remember that, or life sciences. It used to be run by the Home Office, and it was a very kind of organized, highly organized, structured committees that dealt with different kinds of ethical concerns in terms of research. A lot of the issues were around animal experimentation, by the way, so it wasn't only about work with human subjects. And then the system was changed, so suddenly the universities as organizations found themselves in a position where each university had actually to think for themselves what kind of ethics review procedures they're going to institute. Do I need to go into why actually having ethical review procedures at organizational level important? You all have your professional codes of conduct as well, don't you? Yeah? How many people have looked at them and know what these are? Well, not that many. But you see, the thing is that I suspect and suggest that you all do, because these ethical codes do not apply only to people in medicine and life sciences, but also we social scientists have very strict norms of conduct. So faced with kind of lots of the ethical review process, apart from this ethical review process, I don't think it ever included social sciences. As such, the University of Manchester started work something like 3 years ago on setting up a different ethics review practices. So what I'm going to tell you about today is I will start with the definition of research, of research ethics, but not the definition of research ethics as it would be defined in philosophical terms, but the more practical operational definition that the University of Manchester started from to develop its practices of ethics review. Following that, I will talk to you about the principles and organizations of ethics, research ethics committees and reviews. I will tell you what kind of research goes or should go to research ethics committees, the procedures and practices used by these committees, and the possible outcomes and what follows depending on different kinds of outcomes from this review process. Now, that is the definition of research ethics that was used as a starting point for the setting up of the ethics committees of the University of Manchester. Now, according to this definition, I will read it loud because I'm sure you can read, but some people are audio learners, so it will be useful to hear it. Research ethics is a worldwide set of principles governing the way any research involving interaction between the researcher and other humans or human tissue or data relating to humans is designed, managed, and conducted. Now, again, the reason it sounds like that, and the reason it has some data and this and that, is because it has to include social scientists. Because the first part of this actually has very long history in medical research. And then, mind you, I think I have mentioned this to my philosophy students, but one of the very early ethical codes in medicine is the so-called Medical Code of Hammurabi. And it was about 13th century or something. It was very early, and what it said is it regulated what happens to doctors in different situations and what are their obligations, how much they can charge. And it had interesting rules like if a doctor performs an operation, if the patient survives, the doctor gets a payment of so many, whatever the currency was in the Arab world at the time. And if the patient dies, the doctor has his right hand chopped off, so he cannot repeat his mistakes. Now, I can assure you that although this is part of a long tradition of codes, ethical codes in medicine particularly, the codes that we use have not much to do with that. Basically, and then you have all the after World War II developments in medicine. So that is the basis. But we have now to contend with the ethical issues that social sciences can pose. So that is where the extension of this definition comes from. Now, principles and organization. According to the background documentation to these committees, there are these 5 principles that underpin the work of the committees. And again, they have their roots in medical science and biosciences. But they are autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, confidentiality, and integrity, which sort of translated means that autonomy is not about the autonomy of the researcher this time. It is about the autonomy of the researcher's subjects. So any subjects for research, including interviewees in social sciences, have to be able to give their consent freely to participate in the research and have to have the opportunity to leave if they have had enough of this research. The second one is about the fact that research has to be potentially so useful that any risks associated with any parts of the research or research design are negated by the potential benefit. So it has to be very, very beneficial research. Now I will link this with what the committee does later, because this, if you think about it, this principle actually has outlets towards methodology, research design, parsimonity of the research design, etc. The third one is about the fact that actually, as far as possible, research should be designed so that it doesn't cause harm to the subjects participating in the research, and if there is possibility for causing harm, there have to be measures to offset this harm which are considered in advance. So basically you can't go out there and say, okay, I can potentially cause distress in this interview, but we'll see what happens when we get there. Some people might not get distressed. You have to include this in your research design. Confidentiality is actually, for social scientists particularly, that is a very serious thing. And one day If you haven't done this already, you will be submitting research proposals to different research funding agencies, and nowadays they all have a section on ethical issues, and a lot of the ethical issues that we social scientists raise in these proposals are actually about confidentiality. So how do you ensure anonymity? Can you have complete anonymity? Because we do promise complete anonymity, but then there are places like Australia where you cannot do that. And the reason is that according to the laws in Australia, you have to disclose any information you have if there are criminal proceedings against one of your interviewees. So in this sense, promising complete confidentiality is probably not the right thing to do. You will have to qualify. So because a lot of you probably do comparative studies, one needs to check the broader legislation in the country when one writes and invites people to participate in their research. Data storage is a very big issue here. And I will tell you about this, but the data storage has to account for the fact that electronic information nowadays is kind of very easy to get to. In fact, I just had an attack on my computer at home, so it does happen. Yes, but I will take this particular point forward. And integrity. Of course, the rule of integrity is about your integrity as a researcher. You have to ensure that at all times you behave in accordance with general rules of conduct, as well as professional rules of conduct. Okay, now we're moving into the organization of the whole thing. These are the principles underpinning what we're doing and underpinning the form and everything else. But I already mentioned in the past there was the ethical review process, and there was a clear structure of committees which left social sciences out of it. Okay? Now we have research ethics committees. When you look nationwide, there are 3 types of research ethics committees. The NHS research ethics committees, which some people from medical sciences still have to submit their applications to, by the way. There are the university research ethics committees, which goes broader than Manchester. Each and every university has created their own kind of organization of committees to cope with ethical concerns. And independent research ethics committees, which are not kind of, I'm afraid they're not important in this context. They are very important otherwise because they cover the independent research organizations that operate. Now, right, sorry, I did press this quite enthusiastically. Now, when we think about the University of Manchester research ethics committees, you should be aware that there are actually 5 university research ethics committees. They're supposed to be specialized because it is quite clear that I, as a social scientist, probably am not well placed to discuss ethical concerns in very specialized medical research, except if I'm there to kind of oversee what the medical scientists are doing. But my experience with this is that when I get an application from medical sciences particularly, I have a problem understanding the title. And anything that I have a problem understanding the title of, I think that I'm not in a position to judge in an informed and competent manner. Now, so the committees are supposed to be specialized. So the committee I sit on is the so-called committee number 2, which kind of starts sounding really Orwellian a bit. So it is research ethics committee number 2, and that is the one that is supposed to be specialized in social sciences and humanities. Now, The interesting thing is, though, that in practice, we get quite a few applications from medicine and life sciences. And there are people from physics, medicine, and life sciences sitting on this committee as well. So I will kind of discuss this on the last, when I get to the last slide eventually. But the interesting thing is that this makes the dynamics in the committee and the discussions and kind of the constructions of criteria, very, very interesting and somewhat, I would argue, controversial. Jared Ruff, by the way, who is the administrator servicing committee number 2, suspects that what in practice happens is that applications go to the first committee that is supposed to have meeting after the application gets in. And that is why we get kind of things from medicine and life sciences. I can see this sounds familiar to Angela, so she is nodding and smiling. Okay? Now, it is quite obvious that it won't make sense for all possible research proposals to go to these ethics committees, particularly things related to assessment of programs, audit of programs, etc., etc. So the documentation sets out clearly what kind of research projects need to go to these committees, and these are research projects that involve physical risk or inconvenience to subjects, admission of drugs, medicinal drugs, that is, risk of psychological damage, privileged access to records and personal data, risk of disclosure and leaks, vulnerable subjects, deception of subjects, which actually puzzles me. I intend to seek written clarification on this one because I missed it somehow during the induction for participation on the project. I suspect it has to do with giving somebody placebo medicine or something. Use of fetal material, use of tissue from living subjects, cadavers or tissue from recently dead people. Now, most social scientists will probably never get to the last 3. It's very difficult to interview cadavers, actually, I find. Deception of subjects, we have quite strict professional rules about this as well. Actually, we are instructed to be truthful in all possible senses with the very few exceptions, and that is participant observation, where you don't deceive but you don't disclose your role. And all colleagues I've spoken to who have done participant observation have found that there are big ethical problems and cognitive dissonance for them. In fact, to the extent to which many of them have been telling me that it ruined their family life and personal life and this kind of thing. Because imagine being in role, in costume all the time. You kind of can't keep it up. It creates problem for the researcher. Vulnerable subjects is a more interesting one. Please pay attention to that, because you might end up working with what is classed as vulnerable subjects. The vulnerable subjects issue is particularly widespread in education, and we get a lot of applications from the School of Education about that. But then, you see, there are other classes of vulnerable subjects. The privileged access to records applies to us. Psychological damage, interestingly enough, we as social scientists actually can cause quite a bit of psychological damage. So at first when you read it, you think, oh yeah, they're not ethical concerns, but whenever you design your research, please pay attention to this, because it is possible to cause distress and psychological damage. Admission of drugs, not very likely. And physical risk or inconvenience, again, this is more about medicine. Now, procedures and practices. Which research ethics committee? I told you that the one you you should aim for is Research Ethics Committee number 2. It is chaired by Professor Søren Holm. It is has membership, has very large membership, but kind of not all members are there all the time. We rotate depending on other commitments. But at the end, it is very likely that you will get the next research committee. So according on the same logic, we get applications from medicine and biosciences, not from engineering and physical sciences, interestingly. They don't have contact with human beings. That's why, probably. Anyway, so it's very likely that you will go to one of the other committees. Now, how is the whole thing done? Whenever you consider whether your research proposal project should go to one of these research committees, to decide whether it should go to the committees, you need to do two things. First, read the guidelines, and second, talk to people who know and have experience of that. So talk to your supervisors, talk to colleagues, etc. To decide whether they should be done. What you decide or not, actually, there's a school level procedure where I think all proposals actually go with very few exceptions, and then that is a check mechanisms. This school level procedure checks whether there are serious ethical concerns that actually make it worthwhile for this proposal to go to the university ethics committees, or they are kind of not serious ethical concerns, so it can be signed off and dealt with within the school. Now, once you've clarified and once you know that you should go to one of these research ethics committees, you have to fill in an application form. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the application form is a light touch and a pleasure to fill in. It isn't. In fact, I actually think that it is quite cumbersome, and it can be designed better, but that is what we have. And don't forget, it has to apply to everybody, all kind of different research fields in this faculty, so you end up with a lot of compromises. Before we start knocking the form down, though, I would like to mention to you that the form is very useful in one specific way. It makes you think whether and what are the ethical concerns you need to pay attention to. It also makes you focus, revisit your methodology and reconsider it in terms of potential harm, distress, parsimony, etc., etc. Okay. Now, this form is available from the web. It's on the website of Manchester University. As most things on the website of Manchester University, it is not easy to find, but we have to test our intelligence in all possible ways, as I continue saying. And if you fail this test, you can always ask either the research administrator of the school, or if this fails, Jared Ruff probably knows where the form can be found. So, if in doubt about anything, in fact, ask the local research administration or Mr. Jared Ruff, Services Committee number 2. Now, once you filled in the form, PhD researchers, please note that filling in the form has to be discussed with your supervisor. All points of the form. The supervisor has to have a look at the form and help you fill it in. Now, once it has been filled in, it has to be submitted to the research administrator of the school, because the application form that goes to the ethics committee has to be signed off by the head of school or a designated person in the school. Okay, and then it comes to the committee. So that is your job, the first stage of your job done. Once it comes, okay, sorry, before we go to once it comes to the committee, what to watch for? the form asks you about the objectives of your research. And it's very useful when the objectives that you put on the form are very clear. Okay? And by the way, that is useful for you and your research. It's useful for any research. I don't know, you probably have heard this before, but any research that actually doesn't have clear, concise questions and the argument cannot be set out in a page, I would sit down and seriously consider whether I should go in the direction I have started. If I end up writing 20 pages and I don't know what I'm doing, I think, okay, that's probably not worth doing. So that is useful. So clear objectives. Sound methodology. And that is mainly the issue, I think, for the committee, mainly the issue of parsimony is important. How do you achieve maximum effect with minimum kind of bother for the respondents? Quality of application. Many people submit, but that is a general thing. People submitting research proposals to the research councils do absolutely the same. Basically, the whole thing is badly written. And it is badly written in terms of different things. It's bad style, bad typos. It's not formatted properly. It is too small font, so middle-aged people like me stop being able to read it. And if I have to evaluate it, I go, no, this goes in the bin because I can't read it. You know. So if you can't get the font size right, so this sound like minor things, but they're very important. And let me tell you, recently I was interviewing members of peer review committees for the European Research Council. All of them, across the spectrum of research fields and disciplines, starting from theoretical physics and ending with musicology, said that what actually they get their first impression about the quality of this application is the way in which it is written. If it is written clearly and well, it's very likely that people who are applying know what they're doing, is the implication. You can argue with the link, but that's how the world works. So if you want to have more straightforward ride with this committee, please make sure that your application is well written, the quality of application is good. Make sure that all the questions are answered. If you don't understand something, please ask, seek advice and clarification. Because there are questions on the form about indemnity insurance, for example, and a lot of people in humanities and social sciences, we don't even know how to spell indemnity, right? But it is very important because apparently the university covers us. And then some people from visual anthropology recently argued that they don't need that. They put on the application that they don't need that. And then somebody said, but come on, you're going to be carrying all this expensive recording equipment and the rest to South Africa, and you're going to record people in Soweto using this equipment. How don't you need this insurance? You know, this can be stolen, you can be bumped on the head, you need insurance, man. Put down that you have insurance, because you do, right? But anything that you don't know what it means or don't understand, just ask and check. And of course, all supporting documentation has to be attached. And I cannot tell you what kind of supporting documentation you will need, because this depends on your research. But in general terms, you will need your research protocols, including social sciences research. You need your letters to participants. It doesn't matter whether you do surveys or interviews. You write to your participants to ask them to participate. You need to attach that. You need consent forms where and if necessary, etc., etc. Now, what happens next? This is one of my beautiful images that made my computer be attacked by these hackers people. Right, anyway, what happens next? You finish this part, and let's assume that the head of school or designated person signs your application off, and it goes to this kind of thing called the University Research Ethics Committee, number 2. Now, there are two possibilities. First, in many cases, approval is granted without contacting you for further clarification. So the members of the committee will receive about that much applications, and we look at them and we sit there and discuss them for 2 hours, and we approve some of them, right? Once there are applications where it is quite clear from the outset that there are points for clarification, there are things that are not clear, there are ethical concerns that haven't been raised, but the chairperson or member of the committee raised before the meeting. So the people who have written these applications are invited to the meeting. Okay, and in the case of PhD researchers and master students and sometimes undergraduate students, they should come with their supervisors, because the supervisor has responsibility for the whole thing. So, invitation to the meeting. Usually what happens when you're invited to the meeting is members of the committee raise their concerns with you. And to the extent to which you have a satisfactory answer to these concerns, it's all right. If you don't, you're asked to revisit, reconsider, change, and then resubmit, and then it is approved by chair's action. So it doesn't go, you don't have to wait for the committee again. Now, one of the more extreme cases we kind of dealt with and was somebody from visual anthropology who actually, we calculated that he will be expecting his interviewees to give him something like 80 hours of their life over a year, but still, this is 80 hours of their life. And, well, he was doing this very interesting, I thought methodologically it was quite interesting, because he did this walking a street recording thing, because it was about how the political and economic change in South Africa in the last 20 years or so affects identities and personal destinies. So basically there were several streets that went through different parts of Johannesburg chosen, and then between 10 and 15 participants were to be recruited, but each of these participants had to give roughly 80 hours, because this has to be repeated at regular intervals, etc., etc. So the committee, members of the committee, raise a question that, hold on, how is this person going to do this? Who is going to give him 80 hours? And I immediately thought that we're venturing into a domain which probably we shouldn't, because I did suspect that that is a well-established research methodology in visual anthropology, and that we're questioning the methodological approaches of a discipline we don't know, a lot of us didn't know much about. However, they had invited this PhD researcher, and once he explained, it became clear that that is exactly what we have been doing, and that actually he has already recruited 10 people to do that, and they're quite happy to do it with him on their days off. He also said that in Johannesburg it's not very difficult to find people who are unemployed, who are only happy to help you to do something that makes sense to a certain degree. So that is the kind of thing that happens. You know, so if you don't have always to go with what the committee is telling you to do, sometimes it's really a matter of clarification. There is no point to be nervous either. We're very nice people, most of us anyway. Now, what are the possible outcomes? First possible outcome of all that is that ethical approval is granted, and you go out there and do your research. The second one is that ethical approval is granted with conditions. So basically you come, you clarify that there's a kind of talk, negotiation, and the committee can say, you need to change that. You cannot ask this question. When you interview children, you have to have an adult present, and I don't care that your methodology says that you should be on your own with the child, you can't. Okay, the danger is too much for the benefit. So there can be approval with conditions, but then these conditions are met, it's approved by JS Action, and you go out there and do your research. And the third possible outcome is ethical approval is refused. And this happened, I think, once. Some time ago, ethical approval was refused, and it was basically a social science research that carried far too much risk for the benefits. It was the surveyed group was supposed to be current drug addicts and this kind of thing, and basically the committee said no, and the risk was deemed to be very large for the researcher, actually. So that is another thing you have to think when you fill the application. What are the risks for you as the researcher? And how are you going to offset them? Because if somebody wants to do a participant observation of bouncers, so they get a job as a bouncer and stuff, you have to kind of make sure that they know what they're doing, that they know how to integrate, that they're properly trained, that they have the support, that they're not giving their personal details out there, etc., etc. So that is a major thing. Now, when ethical approval is refused, there are several things that can happen. No, actually, there's one thing that can happen. People go back to the drawing board and reconsider their research, consider seriously the ethical concerns raised by the committee, and redo the whole thing. Okay? The thing that shouldn't be done, cannot be done, to say, okay, the hell with this, I don't care. The ethical committee, they're just bureaucrats who sit there and they refuse me approval, big deal. I'm going out there and doing it, right? You cannot do that because this actually is treated as research misconduct. Okay, so you are in breach of contract, of a lot of things, so it shouldn't be done. It's kind of very interesting. I don't think anybody has done that, or we don't know about this. But if anybody had done it, this probably everybody will hear, because it will be made an example of. You can't do that. You need ethical approval to go and do it. And right, I'll tell you about this at the end. What are the issues as I see them? Because I told you how it works, okay? But I also will have to tell you that it is one of the probably most challenging committees I've been on, and I've chaired quite a few of those. Not only been on, but chaired. Now, why is it? Why do we all find it so hard and challenging? Now, I think actually that the remit of these committees is too wide. And this comes down to the thing I was telling you at the beginning. I can just about meddle through most social science. I can suspect things about visual anthropology, but I cannot kind of make judgment about ethical concerns in medicine and life sciences because I don't understand what the research is about. So I can't judge parsimony, I can't judge potential risks. it's just not possible. Now, what does this do? Of course, because the remit is so wide, the membership is too wide as well. So you get people from different research fields. Now, what does this does to the dynamics in the room is that most of the time, most people don't say much, which actually means that there's hardly any negotiation of criteria in the group, and all committees actually work on the basis that personal judgment is translated into collective judgment through discussion. Now, given the fact that kind of people don't feel confident with groups of proposals a lot of the time, also means that it's very difficult to kind of establish any consistent deliberation practices, which means that we talk over each other. Sometimes you will end up, or one of us, mostly me actually, gets told off by different members of the committee because I presumably or reputedly have made a flippant remark, but I thought I was actually right to tell them that methodology, to discuss the technical parts of the methodology, is not the job of this committee. We don't know enough about it. I told them that if this guy can't recruit people for this research, he will soon find that he has to revisit his methodology. That is not kind of a ethical concern, danger to his safety. It is a methodological point. And then, because I said it is just probably a silly design, somebody jumped on me and said, "Oh yeah, watch what you call silly, blah blah blah." And that is not because people are badly intentioned. That is because there is very little space for translating personal judgment into collective judgment. So people jump at any opportunity to actually discuss something they know about. And what academics know about is how to tell off other academics for making flippant remarks, right? So that is an extreme case, but that is, thank God, it's actually very interesting because with all its problems, it works at the end because there's always a subgroup that engages with proposals. So although it doesn't probably work as a committee of 8-10 present people, there's always a subgroup of 3 or 4 people who can engage with a particular proposal, or there's a representative from the research field who says, "Now hold on, this is actually, we do it. It is a well-established practice in my field." So, and that is why we revere to expertise and say, okay, which also happens in all committees. Now, interestingly, though, all that I mentioned, although the decisions at the end are pretty sound, what happens during the meetings very often is that we end up with setting relatively trivial requirements to people who have submitted these proposals. So what's been happening since this email went around about what did they do to our computers? They encrypt them. An email went around to all members of staff, and I suppose PhD researchers as well, that all university computers have to be encrypted. And laptops that we have that have been by both universities have been encrypted. So what has been happening since this email went around, and I didn't realize that it's such a serious rule actually, but it's very, very serious, is that we end up, the committee recommends that somebody adds to the form, and I'll have the data on a computer encrypted by Manchester University, right? Which, it is a serious matter, but still as a requirement to this ethical process, sounds quite trivial compared to how do we ensure that somebody doesn't get killed because they are doing a study of, I don't know, retired MI5 agents. So and then on the other side of the spectrum is this drift into methodology, to discuss the methodology, and that is also It is not bad intention. I think it is natural, because if you look at the principles, that actually at least 3 of the principles are very closely linked to the methodology. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Maria. That was very helpful indeed. And I suspect there are a lot of questions, and we've got till 2:30 for questions. I know some people may need to go earlier, but we've got plenty of time for questions. And I wonder if you want to ask a question, whether you would mind saying at least what discipline, where you're coming from, just to help train it.
Hi, I'm from the School of Environmental Development. I wanted to know the challenges in lone researcher policy.
Lone researcher. Okay. Shall we have the questions
You want
first?
to take 3 or 4 questions?
Yes, yes, that
Okay.
will be nice.
Okay, you're next.
Hi, I'm Jamie from School. We found out
You need the CVR check, but that is what we need anyway. Now, for working with children or young adults, you will need consent forms and this kind of thing. You have to check in the guideline, because the guidelines probably specify this. I suspect you will need quite a lot of documentation.
Okay, let's stack up some questions. So somebody, do you have questions? Somebody do, yes?
My name is Justice. I want to how we deal with government institutions, and I want to find out the level of autonomy that a government official has when, by virtue of his position, he has some information, and a superior authority designate this person to speak to a researcher. Will this researcher have the capacity to say, I am not going to speak? Because he is, by virtue of his position, he gets to have access to some information, and a superior officer believes that he is the person to deal with the researcher. Is this person able to say, I'm not going to talk to you? And if he does that, is it possible to get the superior to actually so to speak?
Thank you for that. This was a very interesting one. Okay, a couple more questions. There's one more. Yes. Is it
I'm from sociology, and I was wondering how can I, in my situation, it could happen that my participants speak about things where they're illegal things, minor offences that they do in their practices that the government knows about, probably, and doesn't take action. So it's this kind of level that I'm talking about, and I'm worried how can I sort of prevent them from talking about this, because it's actually not my topic, but it can possibly come up. So how can I deal with something which might go to a territory that they are talking about things that the offences they are doing? Is it enough to just say, okay, I'm anonymizing everything? Yeah.
So it's not something like shoplifting, but you said government comes in.
Yeah, well, yes. I think
We're not paying taxes.
shoplifting could be an example. No, shoplifting doesn't work very well. Let me think. For example, people are obliged to register their children for specific things, but they don't do it.
Yeah.
And the government agencies actually know that they are not doing it, and they don't take any measures. But yeah, it's somehow an illegal area, but it's not the government agencies don't do anything about it. But in my case, how can I make sure that my participants either not speak about it, or is it enough to just say, okay, I'm totally anonymizing that?
Yeah.
We just take one more question and then come back to you, Maria. Does somebody else need to come? Yes?
managed business school. My research involves interviewing policymakers, and it's going to be quite easy as far as I understand in the West. But if I go to emerging countries, then there is no ethical procedures there, and people will not be really used to content forums and everything. So the thing is, how can I make it explicit? How should I behave during the interview, saying that should I directly talk to them, saying that this is our private, this is not our private, and so on? How should I?
Sorry, Danny, I didn't hear. This is all what fragment.
So it's policymakers.
Yes.
So if I go in the West, people are really they already know the ethical procedures usually.
Uh-huh.
But if you go to emerging markets,
Ethical,
then people
yes.
just don't know anything about ethical procedures because basically they're in Russian there are no ethics to be did at all. So if you go to the policymaker and given their position that sometimes they're not, they want some confidentiality, they don't want to speak to you a lot. So how do you tackle these issues during the interview if they arise?
Okay.
Stop there then and
Thank
hand
you.
over to you, Nedeva.
Thank you. Now, single or lone researchers. Where and how?
It's basically a number of interviews within the informal sector, and going there with too many people is perhaps not a good idea. So if I go there just as an individual, a student, I want to talk to people, does that involve extra risk, or is it better if I go with a group of people and
Is it public spaces?
Yes.
I suppose this will be all right. But again, if it is overseas, you have to keep your supervisor and somebody else informed where you're going, so people know where you are at any point in time, particularly if they're remote locations, etc., etc. Similar concerns, by the way, for the ones there's you know that sometimes you need to go and interview people in their homes, and this actually can be potentially very risky and tricky. And then my first reaction to this was, okay, go with somebody else, but you can't, because a lot of interviews have to be done one-to-one, and the presence of somebody else changes the dynamics and the quality of your data. So in these cases, you have as well to tell people where you are, where you're going. Then some people have been suggesting that you can take somebody else, but they stay outside. You go inside the house, and they kind of read for an hour in the rain outside. Okay? But yes, keep in kind of more public spaces and keep people informed where you are. Right. Government organizations, of course they can refuse to talk to you. This happens all the time. You contact people and they say, okay, I don't want to talk to you because that is a confidential matter. Okay. Now, what you do is very context specific. I always try in the letter sent to first specify exactly what I'm interested in and make sure that that is not a confidential matter. I know, I've checked. And although they kind of have, somebody asked about the confidentiality part, you did. How do you make sure that they don't talk about it? I always, in the write-up, say, I don't want to know, we're not discussing that. And it all has to be very specific, what you're discussing and what you're not discussing. Now, they can still refuse to talk to you, but that is because people in hierarchical organizations can be very worried. Okay, and then, yes, you go to the next level and try to make somebody see you. Failing that, you will have to think how you can get this information using other means. Because there are situations where interviews just don't work. They're not going to, you always have, or not only interviews, any other method. I was trying to convince actually people to allow me to observe the work of peer review committees of the European Research Council. And although the secretary of the scientific committee gave me access and said, fine, because it is European Commission matter, the Commission said absolutely no way. So I had to have a way, I had to find a way to kind of come up with the same or similar, as good as the same outcome, using completely different methods. It's, I hope this answers your question. Minor transgressions of different kind. First of all, you will have to set out the boundaries of what you're interested in and what shouldn't be discussed very clearly in writing when you recruit, when you approach people. However, very often things slip in. Are you recording your interviews? You will have to mention that if any incriminating, self-incriminating things slip into the interview, these passages will be deleted, not taken into account, and this kind of thing, because that is one of the oldest ethical concerns. And it, by the way, it can happen with anything innocent. You're interviewing something, you're recording, and suddenly his wife or her husband bursts into the room and says something that shouldn't be recorded. You know, so that is way to cope with. Okay. By the way, for the ones who do interviews, don't forget that always you have to have first a statement about the ethical code that we follow in this, and you have to specify very clearly that if you do a direct quotation, you quote something from the interview, you need the written permission of the interviewee to do that. Okay? So
just to follow up on that point, do you get the written permission as part of the informed consent, or would you then have to go back to the Untitled Chapter?
You see that the problem, well, yes and no. If you have informed consent anyway, consent form, you can do that. It will save you time. But a lot of the time, you don't ask for, you don't have a consent form. It depends who you interview and how you interview. So when I interview Nobel Prize winners, I don't ask them to fill a consent form. But then if I quote something, I have to send them a message saying, this is what I'm quoting. Do you mind?
But in a situation where you're interviewing 20 people in their homes, for example, and you are able to explain how you're going to use their interview material and say that I will want to use some quotes in my publications, and you tell them that beforehand, then
that's
you
right.
wouldn't expect to have to go back.
So, sorry, no, but I forgot to clarify that. Thank you, because that is, in this case, you say it will be anonymized, don't you? And that is the anonymized thing. In this case, you don't need. When it is attributed, because when you interview top policymakers, for example, very often you attribute it, and then you need permission. It's only with attribution. I think that what you need to do is when you approach these people and when you interview them, you follow the ethical codes that we follow. And you can tell them all that will happen. As Angela said, you can tell them all this will be anonymized. If I need to attribute a quotation, I will have to ask you for permission. No sensitive information that can get in trouble will be used if that is the case. So that is the thing about integrity also. You have to be open with your respondents and tell them what this will be used for and what it won't be used for.
So I will spend a couple of minutes before
Yes.
the interview to play around.
Or you do it in the when you approach them.
And in the information shared, should I translate it if I go to
with Russia, it won't be a problem, would it?
No, but I don't know, China, Brazil, or whatever. If
Depends.
you do it in a foreign country, do you arbitrarily?
You have to make sure that people understand it.
So
That's
this
the
is
key
the
thing.
Yes. If you're interviewing them in English or in a language that you share,
We're okay taking a few more. You've got questions.
I'm Rebecca from Politics. I'm going to be doing interviews and one or two focus groups based in the centre, a minority ethnic community centre in London. And there is a possibility, because of the nature of the centre, that some of the people I come into contact with will be asylum seekers. The new social science, school of social sciences procedure says asylum seekers are one of these vulnerable groups which would have to go to the ethics committee. But I'm not deliberately going out looking for asylum seekers. I'm actually not going to ask people's immigration status when I interview them, because for me that's kind of, it could get what I'm trying to do with my research. So do I need to then go to the committee and say, well, maybe I will meet asylum seekers, maybe I will not, or do I tick on this ridiculous new sauce form that has 2 ticks and say, no, I'm not going to be contacting anybody?
no. If I were you, I will actually say that there is a possibility that some of these people will be asylum seekers and they're classed as a vulnerable group. And I will sit down and think very carefully, what does this entails and how am I going to deal with this? That is what the form is supposed to help you with. Because really, what would do if this happens? You're not actively seeking it, but how are you going to ensure that this won't be trouble for these people? Yeah?
You've got a question next door.
Yes, I'm planning to interview different stakeholders and just ask for their opinion in relation to the city centre. One of the stakeholders I would like to interview is the police, so I'm planning on it towards the interview with people from police. Do they have a special consent procedure that I should go through as well as the university one?
I think you should ask the police.
And in
I
case-
suspect they might do, actually, but that is when you... Sorry?
And in the university, will I have to go through the formal procedure at the university for 1 or 2 interviews from the police?
I suspect you, again, I suppose you probably will have to. But then I think this is also a matter for the local ethics committee in SOS to decide once they look in detail, because it depends what you ask them, how you ask them, whether you have sound confidentiality procedures. They might, at school level, the judgment might be that it's too much bother, but
So can consent be sought at different times throughout the research, or do I have to have a full plan or solidified at the beginning of the kind of people I want to involve? Or can I sort of start with other stakeholders and then in a year's time seek authorization to go and interview with these people if I need them?
But surely when you design your research, you will have to know from the outset. If something crops up, of course, you will have to ask later. But at first, you will have to have a kind of idea of who the stakeholders are and who are you going to approach. Except if you do a snowballing thing, and then, of course, it will has to be staged. But it depends on the methodology you use to identify the stakeholders.
But presumably, I mean, you might, from your question, find yourself in a situation where, having spent a year doing your field work, you realise that you need to interview a group of people who you hadn't envisaged needing to interview before, and then you might want to go to the committee and say, I've got so far, but can I do the next step?
That's
Would
right,
be
and that is the
okay?
snowballing,
Yeah.
yes. But other kind of, you start with something, and if something crops up, yes, you can't predict everything.
Do you have a question here?
I'm doing this research where people, when some people you might remember, vulnerable groups, and people who won't be in vulnerable groups are going to be filling in a questionnaire. And my question is about consent. Does the filling in, can filling in of the form be implied consent? Or do I need to have an additional consent form that people sign?
Who's filling in the form? The people you're talking to
Yeah.
going to fill in a form.
No, it is a questionnaire. You're doing a survey.
Okay, then I think that normally you ask them beforehand, are you willing to complete the survey? And by completing it, they are consenting to do it, because otherwise, they'd say no. And before they complete it, you provide whatever assurances you think are appropriate, and you give them a written sheet saying what the data will be used for, how the data will be stored, who will access it, how you'll ensure their confidentiality. I think that would be reasonably straightforward. But I think one of the points emerging from the discussion is that ethical issues only start when you're applying for approval, and they go on occurring all the way on through when you write up. You've also got ethical issues in terms of what goes into your publications. It doesn't stop.
No. But the task of this committee is to say, for this stage, it is okay to start the research. You see, ethical issues continue with publication, post-publication. It's
From architecture, I'm planning to make interviews with the architects or city planners or maybe some of the users of the building. And I'm wondering if in this ethical form, we could some of the questions that we will be asking them, how about changing them through the interview process regarding their answers, how flexible.
no, I haven't seen the instrument submitted. There's a question of the methodology and how you're going to do, and the question whether you will ask about sensitive information. But I don't think we look at the instruments, and they go under the normal thing. That is the rules, the professional rule I was talking about. So.
Good question to that. This whole question about the procedure, once it's been approved, the committee without a reference to an old system we used to get one. And I've actually had an application approved. We've got the system reference number, and that's something that was trying to put on the desk and the extra sheets and publications and trace back to the committee. That's something that's not in the new system.
I honestly, I don't know. I think you should ask Jared Ruff about that. Because I know that what happens is if we approve something, Jared sends a letter informing the person that it has been approved. I will ask him.
Right. Do we have any other questions? While you're just,
How much time does it take, more or less, to go through the process of approval?
Couple of months, probably shorter than that, but I will allow a couple of months.
It does mean that when you're planning to do your work, your field work, and you've got to do it in a certain time frame, you need to start thinking about it well beforehand, because you might have to answer some questions. It might take longer than you planned. So I guess that it isn't a help if you end up requiring an answer in a very short time frame.
Oh no, that's right. It has to be, because there have been quite a few applications where the start date of the project is kind of in the past.
Yes.
Exactly because the application was delayed.
Any further questions? Can I just say to you, if you go to the Methods at Manchester web pages, we've got a section on resources, and under it, we've got a lot of information about ethical issues. We've got the links to guidance and to an excellent handbook here, and I've explained that before. So go and have a look and see what extra information you can find there. Can we once again say a big thank you for an excellent talk.
Thank you.